we discussed it Voltaire yesterday with our students, we discussed Candide. That we know the story, that basically Candide is the story that everything is going to the best. While the story itself is everything is going to the worst, there's no escape from this kind of the vicious circle, so this is a very pessimistic story. When it comes specifically to Ukraine, let me answer as a historian. I was struck yesterday, I just read a survey made by in Britain. We surveyed the attitude and knowledge of the young British person. I was struck by the fact that half of them never heard name Lenin, and 7% of them have no idea who Marx was. It's probably good for them, but also what it means, there's also a flip side to every kind of story, that their memory is extremely short. I wonder if they remember more than I see yesterday on the Facebook, on the Viber. So this is another very, I would say, strong warning that history matters in a very paradoxical way, that we tend to forget history. And the closer history to us, the more we tend to forget. This is kind of another paradox. Why I'm saying that? Because I believe that many people, including in Britain and also in Ukraine, believe that this is what you now have the status of relative security. Because let's take it, relative security is for granted. It goes forever, because there's no history. And if I may remind you, this is more or less the same state like most Europeans had in 1913, a year before the war, the Great War, 1914. And I believe in many senses what they have now is a result of 1914. And let me remind you that there is a brilliant book, one of my favorite historians, Barbara Tuchman, who wrote the book Weapons for the August. And this is about the origins of the First World War. And basically, she made a conclusion that never really headed for the Great War. And basically, the war emerged as a result of mistakes of several dozen of diplomats and the head of the states. This was a great miscalculation. And this is what gave rise to this situation. Why I'm saying that? In 1930, what was the Caribbean crisis? 1933. 1963, Caribbean crisis. 63, 62. During the Caribbean crisis, the book has been published a few months before the Caribbean crisis. And when the book has emerged, quite of sudden, I don't know what the story was, but it was written by the Kennedy, the President Kennedy, Jeff Kennedy. And right in the middle of the crisis, he took efforts to buy several hundred copies of the book and to send each copy to the commander of the submarines, nuclear submarines, just to give him a warning, a message that a lot depends on you, on a single person. It's just the decision of one or several persons could start a war. And it's basically, to a certain extent, gives example that history could help the world, but history written by someone like Barbara Tuchman. Why I'm saying that? Could you imagine that Trump would read such kind of the story of the book? Or Putin would read such a book and take such a kind of a warning seriously? What I mean is that we are relatively lucky that in 1932 we have leaders like Kennedy and probably Khrushchev, and they spoke like Pope, who were very much working head into compromise. Nowadays I'm not that sure that I'm sure that we are one of the most dangerous situations we've ever had, because we have two countries which are headed, I'm sorry to tell it, by the most irresponsible politicians on our time. And their decision, which is really no small decision, which have great impact on this territory. Now coming to Ukraine. Dominic Levin has written a book about the First World War. It's kind of synthesis. And the first sentence of this book is that the First World War was largely about Ukraine. That Ukrainian issue, also Ukrainian resources, played an essential role in the emergence of this war. Basically, it's more or less the same what Snyder tells in his two books, Bloodlands, and largely more than that in the Black Land, because basically says that aggression, Hitler has a lot, and the emergence of Holocaust had a lot to do with Ukrainian issue. Ukrainian issue, because of the failed revolution, was the largest unresolved national issue in Europe. It was probably of the same status like a Polish question in the 19th century. While the large nation divided by several states, which by definition created a source of tensions and source of geopolitical conflict. And there has been an illusion that this issue has been resolved, first by the Soviets, because they buried Ukraine and buried Ukrainian issue, so to say, and then by emergence in the Ukrainian independent state. And nowadays we experiencing that actually history is coming back, and we are now again in this kind of very sensitive and dangerous zone. If I may to conclude here somewhere by raising 2 points. Could you imagine what would war look like if there will be 1914? Or if the war would be won not by the Entente, but by Germany in 1918. If the war would be won by the Germany, it has nothing to do with political correctness. Just imagine, there was a chance. By the summer of 1918, everybody believed that Germany already won the war. Most likely, there will be independent Baltic states, independent Ukraine, independent Georgia. Most likely, there will be no Bolsheviks in Russia, or they would be there, probably wouldn't stay there for a longer time. If this would be a chance, probably there will be no Hitler, all the kind of things. I probably wouldn't have a Second World War with all the kind of consequences, creating European Union, all the kind of things. So where I'm driving at, Ukrainian Revolution 1917 failed, and this is nowadays large consensus among historians. Not because Ukraine was weak. Ukraine was weak, but everybody was even weaker comparing to Ukraine. The Lithuanian case was much weaker, but still Lithuanian preserved the independence, Ukraine not. The average consensus is that Ukraine failed this revolution because of the lack of the bad geopolitical context, because of the lack of geopolitical support, because Ukraine was left on its own and nobody really cared. So this is the lesson which comes from. Again, it's not my lesson that many historians says, and probably one of the most important is Alexander Gershon. You probably know him, he's the famous economist. He basically says that the main lesson of the 20th century that could be drawn from this history, you could not leave unhappy nations behind. Because it fires back. It fires back because still creates a tension. And this is probably the main lesson of the 20th century history. Thank you.